You're listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Mike, for those who haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
So my name is Mike Corvino. I'm a clinical pharmacy specialist with ambulatory care in a federally qualified health center down in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm also a adjunct professor for the physician assistant program at Charleston Southern University. So I teach all of their pharmacology, pharmacotherapy. And then my fun job, if you will, is I'm the host of the CorConsult RX podcast, and as well as I run the social media platforms associated with all that. And so I do a little bit of everything. Today we are going to focus on something I think that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's kind of opening doors, so to speak, for your career and kind of making sure that you don't get stuck in something that could potentially be not as enjoyable or desirable of a position or job as it once was, and just making sure that opportunity is kind of available when you need it to be.
So when you talk about opportunity available when you need it to be, that leads me to believe that taking the opportunity is not necessarily the end goal. That's not necessarily the money maker at the end. Explain that.
This is for me personally. I know everybody's kind of different. Some people who, do really well with having a very goal-oriented approach. I'm just not, that's not my personality. And so for me, it was really starting CorConsult and all that kind of stuff ultimately was just a way of kind of keeping myself accountable to ensure that I was keeping up with the clinical data that was coming out and keeping my knowledge fresh. And so for me, it wasn't even really a thought of, can I monetize or, what's the end game with all this? It was really just initial. I didn't even expect anybody to listen to my podcast initially. It was really just to kind of, I knew if I put it out in the public, I wouldn't want to kind of go back and do it for a month and be like, oh, never mind, too hard. And so I just did it for my own self because I knew that I would keep doing it if I had it, come out in the public and said, I'm going to do this, if nothing else, just for my own, ego or something. But that really was ultimately what it was. So I had the luxury of not having to worry so much about the monetization aspect of it. I just kind of figured that if I tried different avenues and said yes to whatever I could, that would ultimately end up in different, with different doors opening and things like that. And then when I started seeing some opportunities that were, coming about because of CorConsult, that's when I started realizing, oh, this could actually be something. And, so then I just kind of ramped it up even more, and it's sort of been a snowball effect since then.
You're independently wealthy. You don't have to have a job, and you get to sit home all day and play with the podcast. Is that right?
Oh, it's just spot on. No, I wish.
You've got a job. So why in the hell are you doing a podcast then, people will ask?
And a lot of people have said that, in the beginning when I was first starting all this, that, and this was, early on when I was barely, in my opinion, barely doing anything with it compared to what it is now. It was like, oh, you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. The problem is burnout in general anyone in the medical field especially is a very real thing anyway. So it's not like I wasn't really all that worried about that aspect of it. I mean, so many people will complain about burnout, and to me, I'm very fortunate to the fact that I love anything to do with pharmacotherapy, pharmacology. So for me, I'm not as worried about the burnout aspect because there's just an endless supply of stuff you could keep learning, and you can kind of play the game forever, so to speak. But that's again, me personally, just because I have those interests. I'm just a big nerd. But when I was thinking about the kind of why going about doing this, it started off with a comment somebody made when I was a fourth year student at MUSC. It was a pharmacist that I was kind of working with as an intern, technician, whatever you want to say, just in a retail setting. And I was talking about something I had learned on rotation that day or whatever. And the pharmacist kind of made a comment and didn't even mean anything negative by it, just kind of blanket statement, said, I'm glad you're having so much fun, really enjoy this time because this is kind of the smartest you'll ever feel. And I don't know why, because it's a pretty absurd comment, but I guess for whatever reason, it just really stuck with me. And I was like, I I never want to be that person. I'm like,
Yeah.
could you imagine, like, and I've used this analogy in other talks and stuff, but I'm like, could you imagine if you went to your surgeon's, your office or appointment or whatever, and the surgeon who's going to perform surgery on you was like, man, I just wish I was as good as I was back in medical school. Like we would this, I'd be like, that you'd be like, what, this guy's a lunatic.
Right.
And so I'm like, how in the heck can a pharmacist get away with saying that? Like a dentist wouldn't say that. Like we're like the only healthcare professional that could ever utter that, phrase. So that bothered me. And then I started, you start listening to more people complain and, as people like to do. And I started hearing all these people talk about their burnout. And so, of course, that's why they're giving me all this burnout advice, because that's how they feel. And so I just was like, man, I have got to make sure that the second I feel less than happy at this job that I'm in or whatever I end up doing, that I can jump and do something else completely different if I need to, and not feel trapped or like that I'm stuck, because that's how I feel burnout really truly happens.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what started the whole thing. And like I said, I really started the podcast and all that as a way of just almost like accountability to myself, to keep making sure that I was staying up with information and all that, and just kept going from there.
Mike, anybody else that is going to learn something, they'll do it with a magazine on the counter. They don't feel a need to create a podcast. What was it in your personality that you thought the podcast was the method for you to stay up on things?
To be honest, it wasn't even the podcast at first. It was actually because I started off with posting just drug updates or new research on Instagram and Facebook. And then, I started my podcast, I guess, the January of 2018, but I had already been doing the quote unquote CorConsult thing on social media probably for like 6 months up until that. And I just kind of saw how many people, podcasting's been around for a quick minute now, but it just feels like in 2017, 18, people kind of had like this resurgence of like listening to podcasts again. And I was like, I wanted to go where the attention was as far as the listeners and people paying attention to my content. And so I was getting some success with Instagram. It's, very, very little, success, but some followers and things like that. And so I was like, well, I just kind of natural progression into a podcast. I have a tendency, and you mentioned personality, I do have a tendency, I must admit, to kind of get, when I really like something, I get a little obsessed with it, and always am trying to like improve on it or get better at it. And so when I started doing some of the stuff with, making videos for, Instagram and things, I realized like, one, I'm pretty terrible at, doing this recording thing and learning all this that and the other that goes along with it. And so I wanted to get better at that. And then it was just kind of I was like, well, I can do more long form, conversations and actually explain some things more in depth, with these people who are already looking at my little snippets on Instagram and Facebook. So I figured it would just kind of, be a little another avenue for people who learn by more deeper context. And so, it just kind of went from there. And then we started off with a $25 USB cheap mic. And then I feel like every week it was like, what can I do to improve this? What kind of, equipment can we get? What can I learn how to do as far as editing or whatever? And it just kind of continued on from there.
If you're like me, and I've done like, let's say blog posts in the past and so on. And even today, like I was using the word, I thought I was going to use the word swarmy. And in my mind, swarmy meant kind of like, just kind of like thick, like laying it on, kind of fake and so on. So I said, I better check that word out. So I looked it up, and it's not even a damn word. The word is smarmy, I think, with an M, smarmy. And the point is, like, whenever I had to do something on a blog or the podcast, if I'm going to think of something, I know the world, or, in my mind, the world is probably, my wife in the car and our dog listening or something like that. When I know the world's going to hear it, it forces me to really organize that. And I'm sure you've done some of that too with your show, that it's like, all right, I could read this, but if I'm going to regurgitate this out, not only regurgitate, but if I'm going to put this out under my name and my concept here, it better be right, and so right that I'm able to communicate it out again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with that whole expression of the best way to learn something is by teaching it, that's been something everybody kind of says for forever, but really is true. And I mean, if you are preparing content to be able to go out to the public, whether it's audio or video or whatever, yeah, you end up putting that time into the research to make sure it's good because it's going to be scrutinized. I mean, it's the internet. They're going to, when you do something bad, they're going to be the first people to tell you about it. And
That's right.
So it's something that, yeah, you end up putting that time in, and when you put that time in, obviously you end up learning the material better, and that's what ultimately led to me, teaching and doing that kind of thing as well. But it was like practice. It started off with the podcast and doing things just kind of for fun. Now it's turned into part of my career.
Someone looks from the outside and says, well, I'm never going to do something like Mike's doing because I have a full-time job. Well, so do you, and so do I.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell somebody if they use that as their first entry into why they can't do something?
It depends on, I guess, what ultimately will bring them happiness. Because I personally, and I tell every one of my students this when they come on rotation with me, I'll ask them, like, what are you interested in? And, I kind of explain the things that I'm involved with, not just at the clinic, but teaching and the podcasts and yada, yada. And I'll basically tell them, like, do you tell me what you are the most interested in, and we can spend time doing that. We'll obviously dabble in some of the other stuff too, but I don't ever try to push like my work. I have a horrible work-life balance, and so I don't try to push that on anybody because I think that a lot of people would be miserable if they worked the hours that I work. Now, at the same time, if somebody's coming to me and complaining about the position that they're in or afraid of being in and not being able to move and transition or not have certain opportunities, and then their next sentence is, but I also don't have time to blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, which one is it? One of the greatest, most honest things a student ever told me one time, I've used him as an example multiple times, so if he ever hears this, he's going to be like, what the heck, man? But I had a student one time that, I was kind of giving my rah-rah speech about because I used to be a lot more gung-ho about, everyone needs a side hustle and this, that, and the other. And then he said to me something, I was kind of giving him my rah-rah nonsense. And then he said, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I hope this doesn't make me sound like a slack or anything, but, I want to do a good job as a pharmacist, but I really want to just kind of work. He was from a small town. He's like, I'm going to work in an independent pharmacy, and I'm going to be okay with that. I'm going to enjoy that. I want to do a good job, but ultimately, I just want to make enough money so that I can go surf whenever I want to, and that's what his ultimate thing in life was surfing and being at the beach and thing. And I realized at that point, I'm like, well, I shouldn't be giving this kid the same advice I would give my clone sitting in front of me because my life would make him terrible. Like he would be burned out in 5 seconds. He would hate it. And where vice versa, if I had to, like, the thought of only doing enough pharmacy, like content or whatever time in my career just so that I can go surf and spend time at the beach gives me like anxiety because I'm like, oh my God, I would feel like it used to bother me taking an actual vacation and stuff. I've gotten better at it, but it used to literally give me like anxiety when I think about going on vacation because I'm like, somebody's going to come and, who's grinding harder than I am and is going to outwork me because I'm goofing off at the beach. And I've had to reel myself in a little bit, but yeah, I think it ultimately depends on what the person's kind of end goal is with, themselves and their career. You have to, if you choose like his path with the, wanting to surf and all that, you also have to take into consideration that hey, if something happens and dispensing pharmacy goes away and the technology changes as it ultimately will, you kind of made the bed of kind of pigeonholed into this thing and you got to deal with those consequences. But ultimately, I don't think based on getting to know him better, so I don't think that would be an issue. I think he would just adapt and go from there. And vice versa, like if somebody really wants to do like what I'm doing with different opportunities and different areas of, pharmacy all at the same time, like it's going to take a lot of effort in the beginning, especially to get things going because a lot of people have microphones and cameras and all that. And, it's just one of those things that you can't expect it to just jump on it and then a week later everybody cares,
When people talk about side hustles and that, I can see someone saying, well, screw you. My side hustle was pharmacy school. I just spent, 7-8 years in this. I don't want or need an extra goal. I just completed my goal. But I think what you always have to ask is when you look out at your peers, and you decide where your peer level is, and most pharmacists are going to think that their peer level is other pharmacists, well then to take that next step, whatever that next step is, that's where either the extra initials behind your name come in or some side hustles. So it depends where your peer level starts.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you know what, again, going back to like what their end goal is, is it to be more financially independent? Is it to do something that you just feel like a sense of accomplishment, but also had a really good job, time doing it? Then it doesn't even have to be in the thing that you do for a living. Like I could easily have started a podcast on, mixed martial arts and, grappling and all that stuff like that. And that would have been fun. I don't think I could do it to the same extent that I like pharmacotherapy and all that, and especially with the content, available and all that.
Yeah.
But if I was already feeling like burned out from my job and just didn't have that interest that I do, I would probably have picked a different topic that I was passionate about. So that's the other thing, is I always remind people, it doesn't have to be exactly the way like I did. I'm just like I said earlier, I'm blessed that I find so much interest in my career, because I think that's kind of a rare thing nowadays. And so it's something that when I go home from work, when I start working the podcast, it doesn't feel like I'm working on stuff that I did at work. It feels completely different, even though they're both medical related.
I tend to be the same way. It's like if I don't do something, even though pharmacy was a goal and my business is a goal and all that, if I don't do something marching towards something else, at least for a while during the day, I feel like it doesn't feel right to me if I haven't pushed hard. And often it's not pushing the same thing, because then it just feels like more work, but it's pushing something beyond.
Yeah. And that feeling of like purpose, I think, is super important.
I think that's right. Someone told me one time, when you're in a pharmacy, you go in the building and it looks like A, and when you leave, it looks like A, and that's one of my favorite times in life was when I redid my basement back when I had more energy, and I would just stand there day after day. And, if I was working on it for like 3 hours at night, I had to factor in like a half hour at night just to stand there in awe of myself, of my work, because it looks different. So when you come in, it's a A, you leave as a B, and the next day it comes in a B, it leaves as a C. And so we don't have that in pharmacy. And so it's nice to have, well, frankly, the podcast, as you see numbers come in and episodes go up and you're marching through the week getting out the episodes and so on. That's something that sometimes it's something that always moves forward and doesn't move backwards because of a management decision or, some insurance screwing things over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big issue with like dispensing pharmacy in general, is that's where a lot of that comes from, is everything's just, it gets monotonous, and you'll see some different things here and there, but that's where I'm, again, kind of feel pretty blessed to work in like a clinical setting with, where basically I have like, collaborative practice. So I have like provider status basically, and I see different stuff every single day. And every day it's like, oh, what's going to happen? What kind of crazy disease state am I going to have to deal with or consult on? And it keeps it fresh. And so I think that's important, is to find that, whatever that looks like, for somebody. And if retail or dispensing is where you're stuck, that's where the side hustle can really help kind of fill that void.
All right. So people hear this side hustle, and back to you, Mike, they talk about the podcast. And a lot of people are thinking of coming home at, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, having dinner, plopping down, then they're done. Where are you getting the time? What time are you doing outside of work to do these things?
So it depends, on what's going on and all that. So it's kind of variable. And I've gotten a lot better at, making time to relax or whatever than, compared to where I was back in like 2018. But I think it depends on where you're at in the process as well. Is, like when I graduated pharmacy school in 2015, I didn't actually, my entire like PTO, all my paid time off, like it was allotted to me from 2015 to 2018. I guess it was May 2018. So it's like 3 years exactly, basically. I used completely on going to volunteer at clinics or like helping with lectures or in labs and things like that, just so I could continue to learn and continue to, educate myself and things. I didn't do anything like quote unquote fun. And then on my days off, because I was working like 14-hour shifts at a dispensing pharmacy at the time. And so on my days off, because I had more days off during the week than I 9 to 5 would. And I would, same thing, I'd go to like the resident halls, and if they were having a topic discussion on cardiovascular disease or whatever, I'd just go sit in the back and listen. And like I got the schedule for like all the journal clubs and all that, that and the other, and I just would go do that on my free time. Days that I worked, and then when my schedule changed to like 9 to 5 like it is now, it was just kind of auditing my time and figuring out where I can spare some moments or where I can do this and do that. And if I came home at 5 and my wife doesn't get off work until 9, then I'm going to spend those 4 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is, at least going through, as much stuff as I can for the podcast or whatever. And then there's definitely times where, and I always hesitate to say this because I don't ever want to advocate, sleeping less or anything like that, because sleep is super, super important from a healthcare standpoint as well as, everything else. And so I always hesitate to say this because this is not something I'm advising, but because I'm spread so thin, one of my kind of like just habits, and I would say a bad habit probably at this point, is every Monday night, so tonight, for example, I end up staying up all night and trying to get as much stuff knocked out while the house is quiet. And I've just done that for like 3 years now.
What does all night mean?
Like I don't go to sleep throughout the night.
Now, wait a minute. Uh-huh. You get home at 5 on Monday night.
And I don't go to sleep until Tuesday night.
And you're not going to sleep tonight.
Right. And again, I'm saying because I know it sounds terrible, and I'm not advocating for that. It's just something that and I know it's not good for me or anything like that, but I'm willing to make that decision, and knowing that hopefully I'll be able to get some of these things accomplished that I need to get accomplished. And that's why I said I'm very particular about not recommending that, because I know it's not a good idea.
I'm going to ask you one word to tell me why you're going to stay up all night until Tuesday night. You get one word to tell me what's the driving force behind that.
Obsessed.
Obsessed.
I want this, CorConsult thing. I want it to do as well as it can, and I want to leave a legacy in the world of medicine and pharmacy, pharmacotherapy, and I will do anything I need to do, with the exception of, I put my wife first, but other than that, I will do anything and everything to myself or whatever I need to do to accomplish that goal, even if it means not sleeping as much as I probably should.
All right. Now, let's go on the other side there, the goal. We talked about CorConsult and obsession and so on. With that obsession of saying, I want to do this, what does this look like in 30 years? What is the this that you're obsessed with?
To be honest, I don't even really have a true definition of that. When I say, I guess the example I always think of is I had a professor, his name is Wayne Wirt, and he's in his early 70s now, and he's one of the most accomplished pharmacotherapy specialists, PharmDs, that's ever lived. And he's somebody that, he's in his 70s and still speaks, especially prior to COVID, was speaking 150 days plus out of the year at every conference you could imagine. He just he's the first pharmacist in history as of this year to get a award from the American College of Physicians. And the one of the precursors or prerequisites rather is you have to be a physician to get this award. And they literally voted and made an exception to the rule just because to give him this, because he's won every other award in academia and pharmacy that is allotted to pharmacists, and they wanted to present him with something that was like a true honor. And he's touched so many people's lives. He's helped so many students. He helped me out tremendously in my career, and I think when I look at someone like him, and he's also one of the most humble people you'll ever meet, nicest guy I've ever talked to, and when I see someone like him, I'm like, he changed like the game almost when it comes to like he showed what a true clinical pharmacist could do, and it was something that when he decided to be a clinical pharmacist, there wasn't a clinical pharmacist to like that position at that time. That was like a thing. In fact, he always quotes when he was like, I guess, undergrad level, he had told a pharmacist that he knew at the time, he was going to be a pharmacist, but he was going to do it in a clinical pharmacist to like educate providers on medication and pharmacotherapy. And the guy asked him, he's like, you smoking pot, boy? Why do you think that's not a real thing for pharmacists? And he's like, I this is what I'm going to do. And he went, and he was one of the first people to like kind of take on that role, and had an amazing career, and still does. He retired like several years ago and still goes to the College of Pharmacy pretty much 5 days a week. I guess he doesn't truly understand how retirement works, but they just let him keep his office and everything. He still goes. And yeah, he made such an impact on me that I'm like, if I can work towards being any sort of, like I guess end goal, it would be to emulate his career and add something to the world of pharmacy at the end of the day.
And that's a noble goal. Is the goal then, I'm just digging, is the goal then the obsession, is it to, and I know he's just one example, is it to emulate that kind of impact, or is it that actual impact of clinical pharmacy, or don't you know yet what specific area you want to impact? Is that still to be discovered?
I want to impact, pharmacotherapy in general, not necessarily like one like disease state or like research on one drug or anything, but the way that pharmacotherapy is taught, the way that pharmacotherapy is kind of thought about as far as like the true understanding behind what's going on with all the medications and management whatsoever. And so it's something that, again, I have a hard time even kind of articulating what my end goal is. Just because like I said, I just want to be able to like make an impact and leave a legacy on the world of pharmacy, whether that's in a specific state, disease state, or in academia, or whatever that may look like. And to be honest with you, as long as it's impactful, I'm not going to be disappointed. And really, my whole thing is I'm having so much fun doing, already on this journey to begin with, that's really what it's all about. It's the thought of getting and working towards something that could potentially take me 40 years to get to. Like that to me is pretty cool. Like I like that because I get bored easily with certain things, and you could spend the next 40 years trying to learn as much as you can about pharmacotherapy, and then realize you've barely scratched the surface. And to me, that's exciting to me. Like that's that mountain that I get to climb forever until it's time to punch the clock.
Do you have any metrics that kind of get you excited, whether it's podcast listeners, responses on LinkedIn, your own knowledge? You found out that you know something now you didn't know 2 years ago. What kind of metrics do you have? What kind of things right now, if any, kind of fire up that dopamine a little bit in you?
Honestly, my only true metric that I really care about is, do I find happiness in what I'm doing? As far as the numbers and the listeners and all that, one, I've always tried to keep everything in perspective. When I would get 100 downloads on an episode of a podcast that I put out, I mean, by podcasting standards, that's like nothing. But if you think about 100 people like in a room, like that's
what I say.
That's preposterous that 100 people would give a crap about what I have to say.
That's exactly what I say.
So to me, I'm like, I've always thought about that. I mean, when we started getting, multiple people downloading the episodes, I was like, wow, like this is insane to me that people, like, I can't imagine I'm like, you guys have nothing going on if you're listening to my nonsense. And so that always just blew my mind that people are like, 100 people follow you on Instagram. It's like 100 people give a crap about what I have to say about whatever. That to me was like huge. I mean, I'd be happy if 5 people had cared about what I had to say.
Right.
And so I never really worried too much about the metrics and things, because I mean, now, we'll get 25,000 downloads a month, and I know, and we're in like just about, I think there's only like 30 countries that our podcast is not like downloaded in monthly. And so it's crazy to think about how the reach now and like the people I get to interact with and stuff. But I still always go back. I mean, that to me seems absurd now that many people are listening, let alone, I've always just been, I was excited at the point when a few people were listening. So it's just all been icing on the cake as far as that goes. And yeah, I've had such a good time with doing, with building this, that as far as the, financial metrics or things like that, it was like once I made six figures, which most pharmacists will. It's like I have plenty of stuff. I don't need, I feel very comfortable. My wife's a pharmacist, so we live very comfortably. I'm not worried about things financially, and we have that luxury of feeling that. So I don't need to make any more money. We've definitely, as a result of all this, have been able to make a lot more, but it wasn't something I needed either. And it's not like if I couldn't have that anymore, that my life would just be ruined. So it wasn't really money that was driving it to begin with. It's nice. I like that we can, buy nice cars or whatever, but it's great. But, it wasn't the driving factor. And so I never really had any expectations of, it was just for me. It was just to keep making sure that I'm learning. And it definitely feels that dopamine release, like you said, whenever I am explaining, a concept of evidence-based medicine or pharmacotherapy, and I can see like in a student or another provider's like that light bulb moment, like I love that feeling. And so the more that I learn, the more of those type of moments I can have, because I ultimately at the end of the day like educating. And so that kind of continues to bring me happiness, which again, like I said at the beginning, is kind of my only real metric that I care about. And everything else is just icing on the cake.
My wife and I were driving yesterday, and we're going down the highway, and I've played her parts of my podcast before, and we're going down the highway, and kind of out of the blue, she said, I listened to 15 minutes of your podcast. And I said, why'd you do that? She said, well, I was exercising, and I was listening to something, and it came on as the next thing. So I said, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And I said, how'd you like it? She said, that's okay. She said, in the 15 minutes you talked about stuff that probably could have been covered in about, 10 seconds. And I said, yeah. And then I told her, my mission from the very start, and I have this written right in my podcast, it's to be interesting and entertaining, and I knew that, and that comes just sometimes from conversations. Why do people watch late night TV? You don't learn something new. Why do people watch movies? It's just sometimes something to do. And what I think it does, and Mike, I'm guessing this is your listeners too, that a lot of times I listen to stuff I already know. I'll watch a documentary on something that I'm already fairly comfortable with. I'll read the Pharma book on stuff that I kind of know already. And you read financial advice that you kind of already know. I think sometimes the podcasts and what we're putting out and maybe what we're listening to gives a sense of community or a sense of, I'm part of that group. And it just sort of is comforting to know that, I understand what they're saying, and it means I'm still maybe a part of something.
Yeah, for sure. I also like it that from a podcasting standpoint specifically. I'm not like the cookie cutter pharmacy student like back when I was in school, and I wasn't necessarily even a really good student, to be honest. I like learning. I love learning, but I like doing it kind of on my terms, so to speak. I'm a very kinetic learner, and so one of the things that I kind of was thinking about when I was first kind of talking through the podcast and stuff like that was I want it to be higher level like pharmacotherapy and evidence-based medicine, but like with a coffee shop, very relaxed vibe. Because I feel like, especially when it comes to medical education, everything's very stereotypical, and it's getting a lot better. But I feel like for so long, it's just been like, you have to stand a certain way and talk a certain way. And this is not how I'm not like that. And so I don't talk like that in my normal day-to-day conversations. And so I don't, even with patients, I'm a lot more laid back, especially with the population that I work with. And I just wanted that, kind of vibe, if you will, for my podcast. So people that are like me that didn't fit the cookie cutter mold of what you're supposed to look like as a pharmacy student could also have an avenue to keep up with information and hear it in a way maybe that they haven't heard it, and maybe it would help and make it click a little bit better than a lecture.
I tell my kids that we're in a very unique time right now because there's virtually no middleman. Maybe there's a middleman still for book publishing on the big printing level, and maybe there's a middleman for Hollywood movies still. Besides that, though, as far as podcasting, writing, publishing your own stuff, blogs, all that, it's a beautiful time.
Oh, absolutely.
With that said, where would you have taken this energy 30 years ago, before blogs, before the ability to podcast? Where would you have been able to focus that energy? Now your energy is spread out to, thousands and thousands of people. They all get a little piece of mic. Where would that energy go, though, 30 years ago?
I guess it would have to be more on the traditional route of like academia and publishing and things like that. But to be totally honest with you, I don't know. It's one of the reasons I'm very grateful that I live in the time in which we do, sure. Because I don't know. Like you said, it's so easy now to get your voice out there and get things accomplished, whether it's creating music or a podcast or even book publishing now. I mean, anybody can get a book published on Amazon, and you can make tons. I mean, sure. It's so easy now, and it's something that if you're not sure how to do it, you just Google it, and there's the answer right there for free. Perfect. Yeah. I feel like almost now, like this my generation and the group coming up even after me, it's just kind of like it's so easy now compared to like how it was for like my grandparents' age of pharmacist or what have you, that I almost feel like an obligation to take advantage of it, because it's like I can't even imagine like having to go to like the library and like look all the stuff up that I do instead of doing it from my couch or my iPhone. I mean, it's crazy to me how difficult things were, and as technology continues to improve and stuff, I feel like it's going to get even easier and easier for access to information. It's going to get more widespread. So I don't know what that would look like. I like to think that I would figure it out, but I don't know. There's probably a lot of people that wanted to be musicians or wanted to do something 30, 40 years ago that couldn't have if they had been born 40 years later. Would have been. Who knows? And I just basically think about it as far as gratitude of I'm grateful that I was born when I was born, and let's see how it goes.
You had mentioned that you like to move forward, so somebody else is not moving forward in your same area. You want to stay one step ahead of the competition. And I think with social and podcasting and all that kind of stuff, a lot of times when it's relatively new, you can basically say, I'm going to put a shiny cover on this and take a look at me, just because you're looking at me and my stuff, but also it's new that you're looking at the newness of podcasting and social and all that kind of stuff. And that's riding my behind, where the day is coming. It's like, the newness is not there anymore. And now it's going to be quality, on top of that newness, because the novelness of it has worn off.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, that's something I've tried to kind of be cognizant about as I've gone through this process. I mean, for that reason, I actually don't even like edit anything on my podcast. Like I literally hit record, we finish, and I upload. I don't care. It doesn't matter if we mess up. Doesn't matter if we say because my thought process initially was that's how I talk. I mean, you'll hear me talking about an evidence-based study that was published in New England Journal of Medicine, and I'll be saying and then this dude, blah, blah, blah. And in my mind, I'm like, I probably shouldn't have said dude, whatever. But who cares? I'll still post it, because my thought was that if I'm like speaking live somewhere and I say, or I say, whatever, I don't want people to be like, have this idea of who I am or what, they see on the, or hear on the recording or video, and then see me live, like, who's this guy? And so I literally just like, I've tried to be as authentic as I possibly can to this whole process, knowing that it's just a matter of time. But if you're not like that, you'll get exposed. And overall, just I know my intent with everything is in the right place. I know I'm not doing any of this because I'm just trying to make myself look awesome or because I want to do whatever, or I want to make money off people or whatever. I know that's like the stuff will come along the way, but my intentions have always been just to promote education and evidence-based medicine. And so I feel like by kind of keeping that the focus and not ever trying to paint myself in a position, I've said on my own podcast multiple times, I'm like, I'm an idiot in a lot of areas. So I don't ever try to promote myself in this way of like, oh, everyone needs to listen to me. That's why I'm so open about, I can't believe people listen to my podcast. I'm like, you guys know, like New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA, they have podcasts. Like, what are you listening to me for? Like,
with your podcast, that lends itself well. There's a nice combination of that coffeehouse feel with the very structured pharmacy stuff. I edit the crap out of mine. I think that guests leave the podcast after they get done recording with me and they say, how the hell does that guy have a show? It took him about 5 minutes to ask a question. But then I get to edit it and it comes out, I sound like a thespian.
Yeah, no, and most people do edit their podcasts. It's probably not the right method to not do it like I do, but it's just one of those things. Like, we just kind of came up with that in the very beginning, and Cole and I agreed, and so we just kind of kept going with it.
I think that lends itself well to what you're doing. I really do, because you've got the firmness and the softness of because like you say, who needs it? Who needs a medical? If you started editing your stuff too much, it's like, just give me the film strips from pharmacy class. I'll just watch those. So that sounds like the way to go, not to edit it.
And I want it to be approachable too. I feel like so many people in the medical world are so arrogant, and there's so much ego, and they get themselves on this pedestal of like, oh, I've accomplished this. I've heard professors say, like, to students, you may not like me, but you will respect me because I have a Pharm D. I'm like, oh, jeez. Like that, like, please don't. I've joked on, like, if you ever hear me say anything remotely like that, please just smack me in the back of the head. Like, I hate that kind of attitude, and I feel like if I can do the respect and the all that, respect of your knowledge and things, that will come if you prove it. You don't have to act a certain way or talk a certain way, despite popular belief. The students and stuff will respect you, especially if you're more relatable and you don't present yourself on this pedestal. Like, I never try to put myself up with students or above anybody and try to act like I'm something special. And I feel like that ultimately makes you a lot more approachable for people to end up asking questions and things like that.
Speaking about asking questions, I heard you commenting in your podcast about getting a lot of feedback and so on from LinkedIn, and now you're becoming I think Cole called you a C-list celebrity, and you were looking for something below Z or something like that. But that's kind of cool. So, but you're getting a lot of feedback, and that's pretty cool with the feedback, because you really see podcasts are hard because there's not a real great comment section for podcasts. And so it's cool to see the social media that comes in, because you can kind of see where, with the questions that come in, what direction people want to go.
Absolutely. And taking the time to actually answer those questions too. That's the thing that blows my mind too, is especially when someone's like first starting out and it's like, oh, well, I don't have time to answer these 3 messages. And I'm like, oh man, are you going to be okay? Like, I mean, I talk to students literally every single day on Instagram, multiple students from all over the world, not just the US. And I do my absolute best to answer everyone via my texting platform or email or on social, because like the fact that those people have taken the time to reach out and stuff and actually listen to your content, like that to me doesn't go unnoticed. And I feel like that can sometimes, when you start doing this kind of stuff, can become like almost like a feeling of like, oh, I can't believe I have to answer blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but that patient or that person is taking the time out of their work schedule and their education to listen to what you have to say, which ultimately will in the end bring me more opportunity and more attention and stuff. So it's like, why would I be, irritated about that and like, or not take the time to do that or whatever? To me, that's a super important aspect of this whole thing is engaging and networking. And I've gotten some really cool opportunities that came from just a simple direct message that somebody sent me on Instagram initially.
Thinking about the podcast, and I haven't monetized the podcast, and I don't know if I ever will. And well, it was actually my wife was in the car when she was listening to my boring 15 minutes. And she said, she wasn't pressing me. She was just like, someday if you monetize it. And I'm like, I said, because I've got maybe 5 years left in the profession, 8 years. And I think my monetization of the podcast comes when, if for some reason I'm no longer at my pharmacy and then I'm out in the market. And I think my monetization comes with a little bit of comfort that with the podcast, compared to not having the podcast 3 years ago, I'm closer to writing out my career, if necessary, doing something I like, getting paid for it because of the connections I made. So I can't put a monetization value on it, and it may never be a monetization value, but it might be a livable salary with a job I love if ever needed. That might be what the monetization is. I don't know.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Like this year was the first, or 2021 was the first year that we actually like made money off sponsorships and stuff like that. But originally, like I had no interest in even trying to monetize the podcast at all. But because of the podcast and because of the stuff through Instagram and all that, that brought about opportunity. One, the clinic job that I'm in now, that came about because of that. The teaching at the physician assistant school, that I never would have thought that I'd be lecturing, period, let alone, and if I did, I would have assumed it would have been in a pharm school. And so for me to like be the only PharmD on staff with a PA school and actually lecture and spend all the time with the MDs and PAs, it's like that wasn't even on my radar. And so that's an opportunity, which brought me a significant pay jump of, when you add that onto my salary. Yeah. And then, the speaking engagements, and now I'm a paid speaker for hepatitis C medication. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it or not, but so I'm a paid speaker for them, and I'm talking to a couple other pharmaceutical companies about some speaking gigs and some other avenues that way. That ultimately, I know I'm making a lot more money now than I did when I first graduated, and so it's hard, like you said, to put a specific number of like, hey, if you do this many episodes, you'll get this much money. But ultimately, I know, like I was saying earlier, I feel fulfilled and happy in my career, and I know that I'm ultimately on paper making more money too. So it's kind of a win-win.
I'm just standing back on this, looking at you thinking, if you would have narrowed that down to a monetization / maybe what we call a side hustle, you might be out in the corner selling flowers or something like that. You know what I mean? Because you're like, I'm going to get my buck of flour out of this, and I'm going to monetize it, and that's going to be my metric to tell if I'm successful or not. But what you have done is worth hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars with career choices and things like that. So if you did a direct monetization, it never would have paid off for you like it is now. And
what's weird is I knew that from the very beginning. There's actually a video of me on YouTube talking at a conference, like a little fireside chat type conference. It was like September 2017, I think. I had just started CorConsult, and that was one of the questions like that one of the older like business guys was listening to, and he's like, well, I mean, how do you monetize all this? And I said, it's not about that. It's about the opportunity that creates. And he like rolled his eyes at me and he's like, all right. And just kind of like, and I left early and stuff like that. And I always kind of laugh now thinking about that guy, 'cause I'm like, it's working out pretty well. And I'm real happy with the way things go. And as far as I feel like I'm barely even out of the driveway with where I want to go with this. So it's like the fact that I'm already having some success with, whether it's financial or however you want to, look at it. It's something that I know it's progress, and I know like what it still could become. And so that, I mean, yeah, I've never looked at it as far as that short thinking of like, how can I monetize this right now? I feel that's why so many things are in the world of pharmacy in general, like in dispensing pharmacy and especially big chains pharmacies, all those things are in such trouble because everybody thinks about things, in the moment, or the 1 year goals, the 5 year goals. And I'm like, how do you create something new that then just can change things up for you entirely and then make the money on that end versus like, oh, I'm just going to make this short-term decision. You know, I could have made short-term decisions early on with certain sponsors and things, but I didn't believe in the product. So I'm like, I'm going to sell this product or advertise this product that I think is trash and then potentially ruin my credibility in the medical field because people listening also are going to know it's trash because they're all medical professionals. And then I'm supposed to be like, oh, you know, but at least I made my $100 or $200 or, you know, whatever it is. It's such short-term thinking. And I feel like so many people get caught up on that aspect as opposed to, you know, I'm a much bigger believer. And even if there's not a specific way to show the financial growth in the short term, how can we open up as many different doors as possible so that financially we can choose which one we're going to walk into or multiple doors later on down the road? That's a lot more interesting.
I could have monetized this to the tune of a few ads in the show or something like that. But boy, you can also, I don't know if offend's the right word, but you can, as soon as somebody, I mean, we all have a right to make money, but to make, you know, $100, as you were mentioning, you know, it's like, it's not worth the interruption of your listeners for that money. It's just not worth the interruption. You start interrupting them too much and they go away, I guess, you know, and I'm in it for that long haul. It's not worth $100 to me to do something like that. It's worth $100,000 in a career and a job and doing this and doing that kind of stuff, but not $100.
But even $100,000, if it's something that you don't truly believe in or
yes,
want,
right,
because then you ruin your career, especially in the medical world.
Well, in me, I was talking 100,000 as symbolic of getting a job out of it.
Yeah,
you know, that's where a huge monetization is.
Absolutely, and I get what you're saying. I'm just throwing that in there as well. Is like even if it was a substantial amount of money, I always go back to like this is going to be recorded forever, and I'm like I can't go back in 5 years. Like there's literally like. You know, I've talked to a company about potential sponsorship, and I told them straight up, I'm like, I can't. I've crapped all over your product in multiple episodes, and I've called it trash and all this stuff. I can't. I'll be a liar. Like my integrity is not worth whatever you're going to offer me. And that was for thousands. And I'm like, I just can't do it because I'll make the money eventually anyway. So I'm not going to sell my my soul, so to speak. Plus, then it gives me the freedom of I can really say what I believe. And then when I do sell a product like our sponsor Pearls that we had for the last several months, like I really truly like that app. I use it myself. So it was an easy sell because I like the product, and everybody knows that if I don't like it, I'll be real honest and tell you.
I've got a few people that will probably never advertise with me. One would be the opaque PBMs. Next on that list is maybe some of the PSAOs and maybe some of the wholesalers even. I don't think they're going to be knocking down my door too soon. But as an old fart, I mean, it's like I've spent forever kind of like, you know, in the business, like, I mean, I don't always do this, but, you know, the customer's right kind of thing. I don't always go for that, but, you know, the cliche of that stuff, you know, and when I started this, it's like, I'm going to give it honest. I'm going to give it, you know, as truthful and open as I can. It's like, that's part of the beauty of not having a direct dollar tied to it because you're not changing anything for anybody really. I think people like that. Just like your non-editing. I think they like some of my non-filtered griping about stuff.
And the people who don't, like, cool. Like, I mean, that's what the beauty of it. Like, I have people that I'm sure don't like my style of podcast. I've heard some of the comments. I mean, some of them are pretty funny, but some of the bad comments we get, you know, and like how our stuff is so, you know, stupid or low level and all this stuff. Yeah. I know that stuff's not true. And so, but I'm like, cool. And that's probably someone who needs to be listening to like a more lecture style podcast. Good for them. Awesome. I don't know why they felt the need to, you know, spend their time writing me a bad comment, but whatever. That's cool.
That's a sad state.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And I mean, unless it makes me laugh, there's been a few of them that have been like, oh, that was a good one. Those are pretty funny. I'll usually read those on my podcast, but not to encourage anyone to leave bad comments, but just, you know, being honest. But I think it all comes back to that authenticity of it. Like, that's how I handle hit like problems in my real, like if I'm dealing with something and somebody's being a complete jerk or trying to put me down, a lot of times I do think it's kind of funny because I'm like, I can, I'm my own biggest critic, but so there's no way they're going to say anything that I haven't thought myself anyway. And so it's like, yeah, that's cool. That was a good one. Good. I just think I take things very, in stride and like usually apply comedy to my own, stuff. Just that's how I handle my, issues and things. And I feel like that it keeps things authentic and it keeps things kind of, flowing because you don't care too much about like, oh, if this person doesn't like this, like there's always gonna be people that don't like your content or have something to say.
Well, if you don't have somebody not like it, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Then you're just putting out a, Wikipedia article or something like that with a computer voice reading it. Mike, the guy that told you that it was a waste of time not monetizing, if you could put yourself in his shoes, what do you think his reasoning for looking at you and shaking his head about you not going after it right away?
To be honest, I mean, I don't blame him for that response. I mean, he's everybody there that was like listening and stuff were either medical professionals or like business owners or entrepreneurs. Yeah. He was, at least looked the part of someone who was well off and things like that, carried himself in a way like that, so to speak. And so he probably had been successful in his career and he probably had, been a successful entrepreneur, whatever the case may have been, and probably a smart guy. He also is sitting there as a much older guy who's been successful, looking at some 27-year-old just talking, blah, 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 who hasn't accomplished anything yet. So I don't blame him at all for having that response. I mean, he also came up in a time where it was a very different world. And so I don't blame him for the way he would view things or think about things. Or I hear, people in my own family, like my brothers in the music world, and I'll hear people say, oh, you can't make a living at that. It's like my brother's 11 years younger than I am, and so I'm just kind of like, yeah, you really can now. It's a lot easier than it was. 30 years. And so, but it's like, am I going to waste my time having that energy with my grandma? It's like, no, she grew up through the Great Depression and all that, so it's like I don't expect her to understand how Spotify and SoundCloud monetization works. And so it's just something that I didn't think anything of it then. I don't think anything of it now. I just thought it was kind of funny the way he kind of like blew it off. But I totally understand why he did that, and I didn't take any offense to that. Like, it is what it is.
And I think a lot of the old farts, you're too young for this, Mike, but I mean, they're dabbling in that with sitting with a microphone, speaking into a cassette tape thing where they pressed play and record at the same time. You had to press down the black button, orange button at the same time. And it went to an audience of one. They don't realize that when they look at you, they're looking at CBS, or NBC or, some huge radio station, it's like, it's a different world.
Absolutely.
Talking about jobs, I got one of my daughters is she wants to be a beautician. She's always wants to do my wife's nails. My best friend comes over and she paints his nails all kinds of colors. He's not in a public job, so it works well for him. But 10 years ago, you heard about that, or 15 years ago, and you were like, oh, fine, someone else is going to go to college, and you're going to be in your little haircutting place and, just smoking and having coffee with the girls in the little diner there. And now it's like, holy crap, with Instagram and TikTok and, blowing it up worldwide. And it's like, I envy someone like that that's got a beautician goal or something like that with social media behind them.
Yeah, well, and honestly, like, yeah, you're 100% right for one. You could be, extremely successful doing something like that nowadays. It's so easy to get your name out there and your work out there. But even if things hadn't changed and look, like the person who was the beautician, like sitting in the, in the building with drinking coffee and smoking and talking with the girls and just kind of if that person is truly like happy in what they're doing, good for them. Like who am I to be like, oh, if you're not conquering the world, like, blah. I don't know. Like I said at the very beginning, I have no interest in like trying to push my work-life balance or my personality or whatever on anybody else. Like, I'm ultimately want someone to feel happiness and feel fulfilled like I do. Yeah. And so whatever that looks like for them, good for them. If that's not the same I mean, there's plenty of people who are way smarter and figured life out way better than I ever will. And they're happy. So good. Do what works. And then don't be afraid, like if something doesn't work, to say, oh, that was a bad idea. Try something different and pivot and, whatever. I think no matter what the situation is, that's the metric that so many people just don't think about is like, are you happy doing what you're doing? And if you are, great. If you're complaining about how much money you make or don't make or whatever, then you need to take that into account. Well, then maybe you need to do something different then.
Happiness is a big thing, and you go back to it, and I keep going to, goals and the why of this and so on, but the happiness is a big thing. And as I stop and look at it, talking about the monetization part, this makes me happy because it spreads me out, makes me more secure. When I'm more secure, I have the potential and actually protecting my family, providing for them. And then ultimately on my deathbed, that makes me happy that I cared for the ones that were put in my care and so on. And I suppose right now, for me, it's setting up the most opportunities for that to continue and hopefully continue in a purposeful way. And that's what you talked about, starting all this because of wanting to continue it in a purposeful way that is engaging to you.
Yeah. And I think, like you were saying, you kind of bring it back towards the, goals and career movement and things, because that is ultimately what does help you to feel happiness and fulfill.
Yes.
Because I'm the same way. If I'm talking to a room full of me, I'm gonna sit there and my competitive trash talking side will be, I will bleed out of my eyes before I let you guys beat me at something. Let's go. Like that's my real, what I feel for me. I just know, and I've gotten better at realizing that so many people are not like that, and that's okay too. Like I ultimately, that's what brings me happiness, and that competition is what brings me happiness. And so, I just am very self-aware about that, in my own life, but I also know that life would bring anxiety and stress and all kinds of issues for somebody else who doesn't have my personality. And I think you got to find out and be really honest with yourself. I think having a podcast or something like that is like on a pedestal now amongst like some of the students and stuff, but I'm like, it might sound cool and everything, but is it truly going to make you happy or provide you with opportunities that are going to make you happy? Or are you just doing it because it's the popular thing now to do, or like the cool thing, or like what you think a good clinical pharmacist or whatever is supposed to be, an influencer or whatever dumb term you want to use? And, I just think too many people are so caught up on like what you're quote unquote supposed to do. And I have zero interest in that conversation of what you're supposed to do. I'm all about trying what you're not supposed to do, and let's just see how that works out. And like, let's just go from there.
As your side hustle and as your secondary thing to add either extra money or extra joy to your life, it's almost like really, really focus on what you love, but then use every tool that's out there now to your advantage to grow what you love and share that with the world.
Absolutely. And making sure, especially from a medical standpoint, if you're not really sure what that looks like, one, make sure that you stay up to date with information and audit your time to see how much, like the whole continuing education, your requirement to renew your license is so preposterously low. It's, if you're only doing like the 15 or 20 hours or whatever is a year, if that's all you've learned in a year, like, oh my gosh, you need to give your PharmD back. Like, holy cow. Like, that's insanity to me that people would spend that little time on education. I mean, for their own life, when you're dealing with other people's like health, it's like crazy to me. And also, when people do have that mentality, it doesn't surprise me at all that they feel uncomfortable switching roles. Like, well, no kidding. I wouldn't have felt comfortable being a pharmacist if I'd never gone to pharmacy school. Like, what are you talking about?
Switching roles, like going from one area of the pharmacy to the next.
Like, I basically, for my own, I was this pharmacy manager for Walgreens, and like overnight when I took my other job, I went to an ambulatory care position doing diabetes education and hypertension management, where I was just seeing patients and sending, prescribing and switching meds and all that. And I did it like just one day I was at Walgreens doing the dispensing, and one day I was a clinical pharmacist. But I had set myself up for the whole time I was at Walgreens to basically, when I made that switch, it was easy. And I wouldn't want to go back, but I could go back to dispensing if I wanted to. I've had to fill in a couple times randomly over the last couple of years at our dispensing pharmacy, and but that transition was easy because I kept up with the information. I kept my clinical skills sharp. I kept my time, where I had free time to go volunteer at clinics or in, working with students and things like that. I made that time available so that it was an easy transition. Same thing with like teaching. I was a teacher, or I wasn't a teacher, and then all of a sudden I was a professor at a grad school program. Yeah. But that process felt comfortable because I had practiced so many times with the podcast and on. Sure. So it was an easy transition, and I've gotten a lot better over the years, obviously, and I hope I get way better than I am years from now. But that it's not like this astronomical like problem or this huge mountain that you're gonna have to somehow figure out how to get over, and that's already by that time it's like too late. So keeping up with the information and basically having as many doors open as possible so that when you decide you want to switch something, that's like the most freedom, or the most freeing feeling you could have. And like the freedom in that is I can't even describe to you of not, I feel very, very comfortable if I had to switch roles tomorrow and go do something completely different, whether it would be, psych or inpatient, pharmacy, whatever. I could easily adjust to that, and I might have to freshen up on certain topics, but I would know exactly what to do and could easily make that transition. And there is freedom in that because I don't have any worry about like, oh, what if I get burned out or this? Because I'll just switch. Or what if my job goes away or whatever? I'll just switch. Like I don't care. Like that the anxiety that I would feel from like being like in a dispensing role, for example. Like I have several of my friends that feel like they're stuck because they haven't kept up with the information, and it's like that thought of them having to sit across from a patient, and now you're responsible for changing all the meds and like dosing things, and they're like, I wouldn't even know where to start. And I'm like, that to me would be terrifying. Like if I was felt like that. Because then it's like that's like depressing as all get out because it's like I'm just stuck. Now what? And I just never ever wanted to feel like that. And so when I'm talking to students or other healthcare professionals, or even if you're in that position of like feeling stuck, like start now. Okay, you might not be able to jump into an ambulatory care or specialist role or whatever, but start the process of getting your knowledge up and give up the time that you spend binge watching some stupid show on Netflix or going to the beach or doing whatever. I mean, obviously you need to have time with your family and all that stuff, and there's certain responsibilities, but the vast majority of people, if you audit your time very like critically, you'll find so many hours in the week that you spend doing nonsense. And that's something that I think people just aren't on it. Every time I hear somebody say, I'd love to do that, I just don't have the time. I'm like, believe me, you have the freaking time.
There's time.
Yes, there's always time. And so, that's a long-winded response to that. That's kind of my advice, is to always thinking doors open, as many doors as possible. I'm going to choose which ones I'm going to walk through, or maybe multiple doors, and just see what happens. But I want that freedom. I don't want someone to tell me, hey, this is what you have to do because that's all you're capable of doing. That's, to me, terrifying.
About the only thing I want to be attached to in life, the only promise I made in front of anybody was my marriage, Mm-hmm. There's a lot of room to grow when you commit to someone and they say, I commit to you through your stupidity and things like that. There's a lot of room to grow, but to have that freedom like you set up is a great thing, to be able to have those options.
Yeah, and maybe it does, and maybe it's completely in a different field. My wife is super, super athletic and very into fitness and works out like 1,000,000 times a day. She's a crazy person when it comes to working out. Like her side hustle, kind of thing would be that. I would not be like, hey, you should kind of do a medical podcast like I do. She would be miserable. She'd be like, you are such a nerd. I'm not doing that. And she's a PharmD as well. But her passion is like fitness and all that. And to be honest, and I've told her this, she's like, oh, but I could never like not be a pharmacist because I went to school for so long. Who cares?
Sunken cost.
If you're happier being in the fitness world, go do that. That's awesome. Who cares? You always will have your PharmD to fall back on. No one's taking that away from you. And I think that's the other thing is so many people get caught up on, well, I'm this because I went to school for this. It's like, well, there's 1,000 gazillion things you can do with a PharmD. And then on top of that, just because you have a PharmD doesn't mean you can't go do something else. It always comes back to happiness because it's like, well, if you're not happy, who cares? If you already wasted 10 years and you're not happy, it's like, why would you waste 10 more? Like, it's going to be, that's how you have a drinking problem. Like, what are you, like,
that's
what
right.
are you talking about?
There's a lot of people that think they're in a dead end job and they think, all right, why should I commit to learning all of the clinical stuff about pharmacy? Because I'm going to learn it and it may pay off, it may never pay off. And by the time it pays off, I'm going to forget the damn stuff I learned. That was the value of the podcast for you, because you could have fallen into that, and that forced you to say, no, wait a minute, I'm going to be talking to the world on this. This is going to force me to keep that. And so I'm trying to think of other things too. It's like, if you're stuck in a job, but you really like business stuff, maybe find something that you have to be sharp on your business. You have to. Maybe it's teaching a high school class on it, or, mentoring somebody, or doing whatever. And the list goes on, if it's whatever. You might not be called then, but if you can throw yourself out there a little bit, or maybe a blog post on your LinkedIn, take a stand, commit to something, write an article, and you better know what's going on. The world's looking at you.
To kind of capitalize on that thought as well, it's people get so forgetful when it comes to the process that they kind of went through to get to like getting their PharmD or something like that. When you're in pharmacy school, you spend all your time. First of all, you pay them an astronomical amount of money. Spend all of this time studying. Then you go and do your year of clinicals where you're working for free. So you're like volunteering. You're paying to work there for free to learn all these concepts and things.
Yeah.
So for me personally, if I just woke up tomorrow and my absolute passion was business of something that had nothing to do with the medical world, I knew nothing about it, every second of free time that I could spend or spare would be finding a CEO or a CFO or something, and of somebody that had a career or a job or whatever that I thought would be awesome, and I would say, hey, I will work for free. What can I do just so I can kind of watch how you go about things? And I would volunteer as much as I could and do whatever I could. So many people think this idea of like, oh, I'd love to do clinical pharmacy stuff, but I don't have time to go back and do a residency or do this, that, and the other. It's like, well, you can volunteer at a local clinic that does medication management for like homeless people or,
sure,
or whatever it is. There's tons of clinics you can go volunteer. Like, well, yeah, but I'm a PharmD. Like I'm not gonna do that for free. Why? No one is offering you money right now to go do that job. So you're not worth that much money to go do it. So why are you fancy and you think that somebody owes you something? To me, I'm like, I'm going to just go and volunteer. Because then, I used to go and help do like a guest lecture here and like do some guest lectures here. And, there's this, that, and the other. And it's like, I didn't get paid at that point. But now I get paid for that. And I get paid pretty well for doing that. And so it's like, I wouldn't have probably gotten those opportunities had I been like just waiting around for someone to just offer me money to come speak when I had no experience and nobody knew who I was.
And arguably, you are getting paid to go and volunteer your clinical skills. You're getting paid 7 years from now when you landed that job, and then
Exactly.
You can take some of that wage you get down there and you can earmark it for what you did in 2022 for free for 2 hours a week, something like 100%. That. So it's what we've been talking about with the podcast, and whatever someone listening to this needs to do to move forward. And don't worry about the money at this point, because you're going to get paid for almost everything you do. It's just going to be 10 years from now.
Yeah. And you may get really surprised, and it may be 2 years from now. And you're like, oh, wow, there's lots of things that I do now that fell into my lap. Like speaking for the drug companies and stuff like that. Like that, I never thought anything about that, because I thought I had to be an MD or whatever and a specialist. Like I started a Hep C program at our clinic, and now I'm speaking for one of the biggest medication or pharmaceutical companies that makes one of the top Hep C medications. I'm not an infectious disease specialist, and they came to the clinic and asked me if I wanted to do it. I didn't apply, and it's like, but I never would have gotten that opportunity if it hadn't been for all the other things that kind of led to that.
Right.
And none of those were quote unquote getting paid. But when I saw that contract and how much they were going to give me to speak about some slides that they made for an hour, I was like, yup. Let's do that.
That's right.
Sign me up for these every night. So yeah, it's just, and it seems like to me such a simple concept that it just blows my mind how many people just don't get that. And like you said, you're getting paid. You're just not getting paid right now. And it's like we all do that when we're in school, and then the second you graduate, that mentality goes out the window. I'm like, did you not forget what you did to get here?
You paid money for it and you waited for 7-8 years. And now you can do it with hardly even paying money for it, for a $10 microphone or a keyboard to write something out or write a letter to someone or show up at some business and ask if you can hang out for an hour or whatever.
Right. And to be fair, obviously with something like education and school and stuff like that, there's a definable endpoint that once I get to that point, I'll make this money. So I get that, because that's going to be someone's argument against what I just said. However, if your goal is to create more opportunity and stuff like that, then yeah, you may not know a definitive timeline as far as when that could happen, but I promise you it's going to be shorter than if you do nothing. If you do nothing, nothing's going to happen unless you just get win the lottery.
Well, Mike, if our litmus test is happiness, you say there's an endpoint for the pharmacy school, but there's enough people that get out and hate their job that it is an endpoint, but it might be a sucky endpoint. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
That pulls it back of saying you don't even know that. So
right.
Make what you love at least part of your day.
Absolutely.
It's 2042. It's 20 years from now. What does a pretty fun day look like for you?
Probably a situation where I'm either going to the clinic to see patients, working in some kind of a research facility, or going into a classroom to either teach or help, or to kind of run lab or whatever the case may be, and knowing that I'm going to do one of those other 3 things the next day. And then having each day where I can kind of do, I like so many different avenues of the medical world or different disease states and different specialties and things. I want to have the financial freedom to be able to just not have to work at a certain 9 to 5, and be able to kind of jump around where I want to ultimately, I can kind of go where my interests lie and do different things throughout the week. And I'd also love to get to a point where, that especially that far down the road where CorConsult is sustainable in making sustainable income that can kind of fund other ventures. And I'd love to be able to get a condo to where when students come on rotation with me from outside, the Charleston, South Carolina area, I have a place they can stay, and that's where the studio could be, and we they can come to work on, stay here and do research. Or if they wanted to stay in Charleston, I have a place for them that's like the CorConsult, bat cave or whatever, and just have it to be that freedom of being able to kind of do all the different aspects of medicine that I like without feeling that need of I have to be here today, so I can't do these other things. I want to be able to jump around and do multiple jobs and keep it interesting.
How many hours are you going to spend on this fictitious day in 2042?
We'll see. I guess whatever I feel like doing at that point.
Throw a number out. What's a fun number, hours spent in clinical stuff on a Monday in 2042?
I like to think I'm still at least doing an 8-hour day to be minimum, but I did 9 hours at the clinic today and doing this with you now, and I got a whole night of me of serotonin receptors and some other stuff I'm working on putting together. So
it sounds like you're slacking off, because today you're going to put a 36-hour day in, and then in the future you're only doing 8 hours. You sound like me, ready to put a foot in the grave.
I'm taking into account the aging process, and especially the years that I've whacked off my life from staying up all night on Mondays. I'm taking that into account.
All right, Mike. Well, I'm going to go to bed in an hour and a half. I'm going to hang out in front of the tube and probably have some cereal and slip into bed by 10 p.m. And when I wake up at 6:30 in the morning to take my walk, I hope you're still going strong through the night.
Sounds good. Send me a text. I'll tell you what's up.
All right, Mike. It was a pleasure.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for all you do. Talk again.
See ya.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.